Americans eat all kinds of meat. Horse may not be one of them, but that could soon change. A 5-year ban on slaughtering horses for human consumption was very quietly lifted last month. We asked the USDA about it. They say if any slaughterhouses in the U.S. begin processing horse meat, the government will resume its mandatory inspections. That means, in theory, that horse meat could start showing up in restaurants and butcher shops. I want to go to Wyoming, bring in legislator Sue Wallace. And Ms. Wallace, I presume in Wyoming horses are big business for you. What is the appeal of this ban being lifted on processing horse meat?
Thank you very much for having me. You know, I lead a group of people, the United Horsemen. They're horse people from all across the country, and the core issue for us here is horse welfare. Back in May, June of this year, GAO, the Government Accountability Office, produced a report called Horse Welfare: Action Needed to Address the Unintended Consequences of Domestic Cessation. And the fact is that 18-month study proved that by closing the plants that were offering a humane, responsible option for horses that weren't needed or not wanted for other purposes, losing that option actually doomed thousands and thousands of horses to miserable deaths, being abandoned, being turned out on roads and hit by cars. In the West, where we have a lot of open country, those horses were turned out. Domestic horses used to being cared for, used to being fed, turned out in the desert where they don't know where the water is, don't know where the feed is, and so they suffered.
If I may, though, jump in, because we're hearing from, just on the flip side, the Humane Society, and I know that they've already published a Horse Slaughter Petition Act. I just want to read part of a statement we've gotten here saying, quote, when horse slaughter did exist in the USDA, the documentation confirms that it was a bloody and terrifying process. Bloody and terrifying. Does that sound okay to you?
No, it doesn't. That's absolutely false. You know, the United States has very high standards for animal welfare, and all animals that we process, the cattle, the hogs, the sheep that we process and use for food in this country are all processed under the United States humane methods of slaughter laws that have been on the books since at least the 1950s and probably longer. And those laws absolutely require the humane handling of all animals, including horses, in that system. And that was the case with horses. So that statement is simply false.
With all due respect, it's Humane Society, and they're citing USDA documentation. I do want to ask you, though, if your state does open a slaughterhouse, who is eating horse meat? I mean, I understand that it's a delicacy in parts of the world, so would it primarily be an export?
It's actually a staple meat in most of the world. China is the largest consumer, followed closely by Mexico. Mexico exports 50% of their production, but they use 50% right there at home. You can find it in Canada. I've enjoyed meals of it in Montreal, in Vancouver.
So you've eaten it yourself?
Italy is the largest. I have.
Okay. Final thought. Go ahead.
So it's widely used throughout the world. It's considered just an ordinary food source in some areas and some cuts, just like some cuts of beef. The hamburger is more affordable, but then you have the high-end cuts that bring a lot more money. And that's the same with horse meat, the same as with any other meat.
Sue Wallace, she represents Wyoming. She is in Tampa, Florida right now. Ms. Wallace, thank you so much.